always a pleasure to hear him because you can learn a lot by listening and watching Lloyd Smith. There are lots of things in our lives that are interesting and important. There are also lots of things in our lives that are boring but important. Lloyd Smith's speech tonight is about one of those things. It's something everyone has heard of, but most people really don't understand. Lloyd's going to explain the rationale behind it. Try to contain your excitement as Lloyd Smith answers the question, who are those guys?
In a few weeks, when all of us are casting our ballot for president, you may think you're voting for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or any one of the 8 or 10 minor party candidates who will appear on the ballot, but you're not. You're actually going to be casting a vote for a committee of 12 people, none of whom you have ever heard of, and none of whom you will ever hear of. Those 12 people, plus another 536 people all around the country, will cast the only votes that will be cast for specific presidential candidates. They're called the Electoral College, or the presidential electors. This raises an obvious question. How did we end up with this system? We're the only country on earth who selects national leaders by means of anything similar to that. And there is actually a reason for it, believe it or not. The story starts in 1787, and as all of you no doubt remember, there was excitement back then because the Constitutional Convention was going to be held in the fall. The one and only big issue surrounding the Constitutional Convention was how would the states and the people be represented in the national government. That was something that was not thought about enough when the Articles of Confederation were written, and that's why the Articles didn't work as our first form of government. There were several ideas about how it ought to be done, but they boiled down to two separate things. One group, about half of everybody, thought that the states should be represented, and the other group, about the other half, thought that the population, the people, should be represented. James Madison, the guy who eventually was the primary author of the Constitution, hit on what was called the Virginia Plan. And the Virginia Plan was very simple. It was to do both of them, to divide the legislature into two houses. The Senate would have 2 senators per state, regardless of how big or how wealthy or how many people the states had. And the House of Representatives would have representation proportional to the population in each state. Eventually, Madison wrote 2 of the Federalist Paper articles, numbers 10 and 39, supporting that idea, and it caught on. So when the Constitutional Convention met, they appointed Madison as the primary author, the chairperson of the committee. They went ahead and did that. There were some minor tweaks and changes made, but the Virginia Plan was adopted. And so that's why we have a Senate and a House of Representatives that are organized in 2 totally separate ways. That idea was so popular that they decided to extend it to the selection of the president, too. And so in the Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, Paragraph 2, it says, each state shall appoint in such a manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. But no senator or representative, nor any other person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. There's a bunch of other language in there, too, that eventually got repealed by the 20th Amendment that was trying to head off a small bit of unpleasantness when Aaron Burr became Thomas Jefferson's vice president, even though they're from different political parties and hated each other's guts. But that's a different story. So what it amounts to, according to the Constitution, each state gets the number of electors that equal its congressional representation. In Washington state, that's 12. We have 10 congressional districts plus 2 senators. In Idaho, it's 4. In Oregon, it's 7. In California, it's 55. It's because both the population of the state and the 2 senators matter in that. What happens is that when we mark our ballots, we are actually selecting the electors that each political party picked to vote for its candidate. In other words, there's a set of Democratic Party electors, a set of Republican Party electors, Libertarian electors, and so on. So whichever candidate gets the majority of the votes in the state, all 12 of Washington's votes go to that person, and they're cast by those 12 electors. The electors actually meet in roughly the middle of December, and there is no college for the electoral college. In fact, that language doesn't appear in the Constitution or in any law. It just entered the popular use in about 1900 or so. They meet in the state capital of all of the different states and cast their votes. Then they write them on an official card and send it to the clerk of the U.S. Senate. And on the first day that the Senate meets after the start of 2017, January 1st, 2017, the clerk will hand the tally to Vice President Joe Biden, and he will announce who was elected president. But only 538 people will actually write down the name of a presidential candidate. We're all voting for those electors. Now, it's a weird system, and it can have some weird results. There are 4 different times in U.S. history when the winner of the popular vote in the election did not win in the Electoral College. The most recent one of those, the one that we all remember, is the year 2000, when Al Gore actually got about 2 million votes more than George W. Bush. But the electoral vote count was very close, and eventually, when Florida was in the midst of a 3rd recount, the Supreme Court stepped in, stopped the recount, and that gave the election to George W. Bush. So he was elected president with 5 votes, is what it amounts to. It's happened other times in U.S. history, too. The way that can happen is that the number of states, or the specific states, matter a lot. And you may have heard the expression battleground states this year. Supposedly there are 8 of these battleground states, and that's where the presidential election will be decided. That's why the other 42 states aren't likely to see the candidates show up more than maybe once, because the battleground states will get all of the attention. On the other side of the coin, they will also get the bulk of the TV ads. Colorado, for example, where a friend of mine lives, was a battleground state in the last election. They were running 20 ads per hour on TV by the time of that election, if you can imagine that. So be thankful we're not in a battleground state. It would be possible, theoretically possible, to get the electoral votes from just the 11 largest states by 1 vote margin in each state and be elected president. You would be president with just 21% of the popular vote if that happened. That's theoretically possible. It's not very likely, but could be. You know. Also, any one of you could be the president of the United States if you could persuade just 270 of those electors to write their name down. In most states, there's no requirement that the electors actually, or no enforceable requirement that the electors actually write down the person for whom they're pledged to vote. In fact, in 1976, a guy from Spokane wrote Ronald Reagan down on his electoral ballot, even though Reagan was not on the ballot. Reagan and Gerald Ford had contested the Republican nomination. Ford won the nomination and then lost to Jimmy Carter. So things like that can happen. The point is, though, that the Electoral College does have a rationale. There's a reason we have it, and it does serve one very important purpose, and that is to exaggerate the result of the election. The electoral vote will look bigger than the margin of the popular vote, and that, in the minds of the founders, legitimized the election more than it otherwise might be. So who are those guys? I don't know. The 2 parties have not even picked their committees of 12 yet. They'll do that in about a month.